Now, and then when it says in Leiden University, he has a very distinguished career academically. And from there, he finally ended up at the University of Western Cape, Cape Town, South Africa. He is a professor of sociology. I think he has retired now. So a former professor of sociology. And we couldn't have any better person to be a guest speaker than someone who is a professor of sociology, a Ghanaian, who has lived in Ghana and attended the university where Sekyi was one of the faithful aides. And actually, the university was founded by the grandfather of Sekyi, William Peterson, who happens to be my great grandfather, direct. And we have a few of the descendants of this great man, Peterson and Sekyi. Is it yet? A daughter of then Mrs. Wemina Daniels is with us. I think the family is well presented. Incidentally, it was Sekyi that brought up my mother when her father made me very much interested in Sekyi. Influenced by him. And many things Sekyi gave her. And for that, I'm very grateful and proud that I come from such a family. Why we are here. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I give you Professor Sekyi Proud as the guest speaker.
Start by giving a brief background to the series of the Sekyi Memorial Lectures that we. It's important for us to place it against the historical background of the ideas and conditions which induced us to start these lectures. Sometime around 2007. Of the significance to Ghanaian history of to have a series of biennial lectures in his honor. And fortunately, at that stage, I was the head of the Center for Advanced Studies of African Society in Cape Town. It was a good base from which to launch it. And so I got in touch with the Sekyi family and some friends, Ghanaian friends, and other Africans who were interested in Sekyi and making sure that his name is institutionalized, historicized properly. So that is how it started. And then we had the luck getting the help and support of Professor Kwame Ninsing, who unfortunately is not here today. But Kwame Ninsing helped me to set the whole thing up. He was then head of the Department of Political Science University. Because Kwame Ninsing was our main contact man and he did all to get the thing up and running. We've been able to work together. One lecture followed the other in sequence properly. Lucky to have George Hagen as the first contributor. And he presented a paper on culture, affirmation, and transvaluation of values. That was the first Communist Memorial Lecture. The second one, which followed 2 years later, was by Professor Amenume. This is professor at the University of Cape Coast, historian. And he also gave us a very rich presentation on the introduction to the ideas of the UCC. The third one was our classmate, Samuel Kofi Datiba, who's a senior judge in the Supreme Court in Ghana. He's a classmate, together with Professor Ivan Mensah, who is also here, the Chancellor of this university. Taban did a paper on the relevance to contemporary Ghana. That was a third Communist Memorial Lecture. One was given by Nana Komnenketiah the Fifth, the Mahene of Iskado, Sekyi. And he gave us, I remember, a rippling presentation which he titled Applied History, Sekyism, and Contending Futures, the fourth Communist Memorial Lecture was done remotely. And it was done by one of the most prolific and senior scholars we've ever had on African political thoughts, particularly looking at people like Sekyi and his contemporaries, looking at it's a big volume on ideologies of African liberation from 1886 to 1997.
Hello, madam.
And that's the Gambian diplomat, historian, he's now late. I saw him last in Howard University, US, and he died soon after that. That's Jabez Ayodele Langley, the Gambian diplomat. He did that. The sixth lecture was a very interesting fellow, interesting presentation by a German historian who was interested in the period between the two world wars and the connections between African radicals, African activists, and the Communist International, the Marxist International. The work of Elie Munzenberg and his relations with West Africans in that period. That was also very interesting because that's a part of our story here in Ghana and in Africa, which we don't seriously look at. We see how radicals and progressives in the early part of the 20th century related to the international movements that were current at that particular time. There were some figures, a figure like a man like Desmond Buckle. Few people talk about him. People know him. Few people know Buckle. But people like as part of the group that founded the Muslim Association Party, you remember, in the 50s. That was the sixth communist lecture. Seventh lecture was by Maxwell Owusu, who's been based in Michigan State University for many, many, many years. You remember his pioneering work on somewhere many, many years ago. Scholars of that structure was on culture, nationalism, and nation building, the role of the Ghanaian intelligentsia. Now I'm offering the eighth one. Our intention is to make all of this available on a website dedicated to publicity. And we hope in the distant future, hoping in a question of a couple of months, we will be able to get it up and running. These presentations on site available for other interesting papers. We may find people commenting on him. So now, so that is roughly the background to the series, this institution. which is now about 16, 17 years old. We hope it will continue. We will make sure it continues for as long as we are part of the living of this earth. Proceed immediately to offer you together regarding Sekyi and relating his ideas to the challenges that lie ahead, because that's the important thing to do for us to be able to take a leaf from the pages of this Sekyi and work on that as some sort of a guide forward. William Sekyi, usually referred to as Kobina Sekyi, was born in Cape Coast in 1892. And he passed in 1956. We were at a charter school when news of his passing was broadcast on the radio. In my recollection, Chamfy House, near mates, it was Albert Fiajo who brought the news from the radio to us. It sent ripples of agitated discussions amongst us. Kobina Sekyi was an iconic figure, a colorful, larger-than-life, controversial personality, who we all, for varied reasons, admired. Said already, are today extensive. His last will, dated the 3rd of November 1956, indicates that he had in the course of his life 4 wives. His father was John Gladstone Sekyi, sometime headmaster of Mfantsipim School, the first secondary school in the Gold Coast, established in 1876. His mother was Wilhelmina Peterson, Cape Coast known as Amba Pava, and was daughter of William Esmond Peterson, an Elmina Cape Coast businessman and one-time president of the Aborigines Rights Protection Society. Along with J.W. DeGraff Johnson, J.W. Say, J.P. Brown, J.E. Hayford, and John Mensah Saba, they founded the Aborigines Rights Protection Society in 1897 to protest specifically the Lands Bill. Sekyi's grandfather, William Esmond Peterson, was also a renowned goldsmith and watch repairer. Sekyi's uncle, Henry Vaneen, was also a businessman, was a president of the ARPS. Kobina Sekyi was in fact an heir of Henry Vaneen, and son of Chief Kofi Sekyi. chief regent of Caicos and nephew of Thomas Houghton Mills, then an affluent merchant and one of the leading figures of the National Congress movement in the Gold Coast in the 1920s. Like his father, Sekyi was an advanced school product. When Sekyi's father passed on, S.R.B. Atwauma, another one of the indomitable and outstanding nationalist figures of the time, also an ARPS stalwart, became his stepfather. Sekyi obviously was scion of the leading westernized coastal African social classes of his time. They were the Western educated hearts and minds of the African bourgeoisie. An important socio-economic representation they generally shared was that they were predominantly men of independent means. This is important. Not dependent on the state to maintain their style and quality of life. They were self-employed, lawyers, doctors, merchants, businessmen, and other professional people. They could handle the language of the colonizer with skill and dexterity. They had newspapers which explained their viewpoints and debated contrasting concerns. In roots and structure, these class elements were the initial Western acculturated native social groups with critical mass in adequate numbers to take on the colonial authorities on their own grounds, with their own rules, in the imperial age when Africa had been meticulously carved up by rival European powers. This was the end of the 19th century, when monopoly capital was in infancy. Frankly, in this instance, they emerged at the interface of a 400-year-old European-African contact area in littoral Africa. This arose along the whole stretch of the West African coastline. They gave voice to African interests in discussions and actions with the colonial authorities. They were a privileged class which had historically been slowly evolving, entrenching, and societally branching out from early beginnings in the late 15th century and early 16th centuries. The roots of this class lie in the then nascent globalizing European mercantilist capitalist system, and was economically locally engendered through the trading activities of the incipient joint stock companies, the merchant companies of the beginning of the 17th century, through to the era of the emergence of monopoly capitalism at the end of the 19th century. A few clarificatory observations regarding these emergent classes are useful here. Already from the Portuguese period on the coast, that is from 1482 to 1642, local chiefs and a sprinkling of other aristocrats who had been drawn into trade with the Europeans were nascent as an influential social element in coastal society, as Cabossiers, Brantford, Condis. In his new voyage to Guinea from 1744, William Smith indicates that a cabossier is, I quote, the master of a town or head of a clan who in military affairs acts as a general in civil and as a judge, making up all palavas or deciding all controversies amongst the souls, unquote. Somebody else who did some research here locally many years ago, Priestley, has drawn useful attention to the old Portuguese derivation of caboceiro, meaning captain. Historically, the Dutch phonological rendering of the same term as cabocier also marks 2 centuries of evolution of the political and semantic basis of the term. Er is nauwkeurige beschrijving van de Gees, Goud en Tand en Slavenkust from 1703. This is very interesting. William Bosman describes them as, I quote, civil fathers whose province is only to take the care of the welfare of the city or village and to appease any tumults, unquote. Mesa Saba, in his time, over a century and a half later, explained that, and I quote again, the foreign term cabossier has fallen into disuse, and the ordinary term of mindful is not so often used in these days as being food. Persons holding this office are commonly limited in number and are elected hereto. That is Mesa Saba from 1904. Elsewhere argued that the cabossiers can be considered to be the earliest comparado types in the political economy of coastal society in that period. Esmond has left us with the following observations. I quote Bosman again, says, because this gives us an idea of the nature of social stratification emerging of the coast and evolving slowly over the centuries. And it is from one of these classes that we get the group which is behind the Aborigines Rights Protection Society, the group which includes Sekyi. He says, and I quote, I have observed 5 degrees of men amongst the Negroes, the first of which are the kings or captains, for the word is here synonymous. The second, the cabocero or chief men, which reducing to our manner of expression should be apt to call civil fathers, whose province is only to take care of the welfare of the city or village and to appease any tumults. The third sort are those who have acquired a great reputation by their riches, either devolved on them by inheritance or gotten by trade. And these reasons which some authors have represented as noblemen, but whether they are or not, shall hereafter plainly appear. The fourth is agriculture and fishing. The fifth are the slaves, either sold by their relations, taken in war, or consumed. Brings in another very important class. Writing in 1744, Smith explains that, and this is interesting, I quote, He said, a grometa is a black freeman who hires himself by the week to work for anyone, but chiefly for white men, by whom many are here employed. 1744. Now, the Dutch appeared on the coast, remember, in about 1595, and rapidly undermined the domination of the Portuguese. By 1637. They captured Elmina. 1642 forced the Portuguese to abandon the coast. Emerson, it's a very interesting work which Emerson did in 1967, a PhD thesis for the University of Vienna. Emerson argued that already in the 17th century, the coastal frontier had developed a clearly hierarchized social structure. At the top of this class structure were the kings, chiefs, or village heads. The aristocrats, the adishi, were generally called Benipino or Pimpon, in tree or Brima. This class was generally excluded from agricultural labor, being concerned mainly with military, judicial, and administrative functions. Traditional traders were known as Batafo. Traditional religious priests formed a privileged group, being also exempted from productive labor. They were variously known as Abusonfo, Nkomfo, or Eshumanfo. Theologically, this is where Kobina name, Eshumanvira, can be derived. 1910, the year Saba died, Kobina at 18 years, went to the University of London and subsequently graduated with an honors degree in 1913. He had wanted to study English literature. However, a fellow student, a Nigerian, Dele Dosunmu, an Nigerian Yoruba chap, persuaded him to give up English literature in favor of philosophy. His university hosted the first Universal Racist Congress in 1911, which featured, amongst others, W.E.B. Du Bois, who presented a pungent and eloquent paper entitled The Negro Race in the United States of America. This meeting eminently advocated and made a strong calling for a monogenetic theory of race, i.e., that there is only scientifically only one human race. While she was an undergraduate student, Lucy Muhammad Ali, in 1912, set up the African Times and Orient Review, the first African-owned, progeny-owned, edited newspaper in Britain, which in time achieved a substantial national and international profile. In 1913, the same period, Sekyi was there, Marcus Garvey worked for Deuce on the Journal. Its supporters included the Sierra Leonean businessman, and in my understanding, the Sierra Leonean businessman was very key in getting that journal off the ground. Zeldred Taylor, J. Kesley Hayford also assisted, Francis T. Dove, C.W. Betts, and Oguntola Shapara. One of Sekyi's best-known writings, The Future of Subject Peoples, was published in the journal in December 1917. In 1913, Sekyi returned to the Gold Coast taught for a while and immersed himself in the study of Akan cultural institutions and developed a critique of colonial society. He returned to London in 1915 and qualified as a barrister. He also took an MA degree in philosophy at University College, London, in 1918. His ethics dissertation examined the concept of the individual in relation to his bearing on the concept of duty. It was a neo-Kantian, non-physicalist inspired discourse. Sekyi became a member of the Aristotelian Society from 1918, the year G.E. Moore, the Cambridge philosopher, became president of the society. He kept up his membership until his passing in 1956. It is important to know that although he made his professional mark as a lawyer, as a barrister, both his honors and master's degrees were in philosophy. This is important because much of his subsequent work shows this very strong bent, this strong philosophical bent. He studied philosophy just at a time when British philosophy was making a steady break from the continental European idealist philosophy to analytical philosophy under the influence of Russell, Moore, Whitehead, and Wittgenstein. This was also shortly before the emergence of logical positivism. That is logical, some people call it logical empiricism, scientific empiricism, principally through the work of the Wiener Kreis, the Vienna Circle, and prominently inspired by the work of Ernst Mach. In philosophy and the work of the historically most influential idealist European philosophical mind of the time, was part of the flavoring of the intellectual zeitgeist of the era in which Sekyi's ideas, his philosophical education, took place. Interestingly, very interestingly, G.E. Moore, the Cambridge philosopher who was the president of the Aristotelian Society at the time, described himself, that is Moore, as an infidel, quote, infidel, urging that there was no evidence for God's existence, but also that there was no evidence for his non-existence. Kobina Sekyi, like Casely Hatford, before him, frequently asserted that he was a pagan. But in these instances, in my estimation, my finding, it was more an assertion of an affiliation to non-Western ancillary African belief systems than the absence of religiosity as such. Sekyi's grandson, Francis Daniels, informed me that his mother, Sekyi's daughter, was uncomfortable with her father's self-description as a pagan. Is that correct? Sekyi was shaped and formed by the Western educational and social institutions. He was indeed intimately familiar with contemporary Western society, Western taste, and mores, including cigars and potent beverages. His son, Henry Sekyi, the late diplomat, recalls his father's love for Western classical music, especially the music of Samuel Coleridge Taylor, who people describe as the African Mala. It is worth drawing attention to the fact that very often the individual historical dialectics of life in the individual historical dialectics of life is the colonial subject who is most deeply immersed in the metropolitan culture of the master, who in time and effect recruits most radically and rationally to the import of expatriate culture, of this expatriate culture. The culture which denies and denies in autonomy, the culture which in the colonial realities ultimately repudiates his or her humanity. He or she may revolt with passionate conviction and substantive understanding of the dominating culture, and in negation overturn the apple cart of colonial culture. The deeper the colonized subject, and in our times, more appropriately, the new colonized subject, absorbs the substance and bedecking of the colonial dominating culture, the more he or she comes to face with the prospect of his native cultural extinction. Survival requires him or her to retreat to the comforts of non-primeval bearings. That is, that if he or she has enough residual or aboriginal cultural ballast to do this, if his or her native bearings are not irretrievably effaced or lost. On his 1915 journey back to the UK, was traveling on the Elder Dempster line ship SS Falaba was torpedoed and sunk by a German U-boat on the 28th of 1915. Interestingly, this incident and the sinking of the RMS Lusitania some weeks later nearly brought the United States into the war in 1915. Traveling from West Africa to Liverpool, passengers who had embarked in Douala, Calabar, Bonny, Bocados, Lagos, Accra, Sekyi, Sierra Leone, and Las Palmas. A total of 104 passengers and crew were killed in the explosion by drowning and hypothermia. SS Falaba was the first unarmed passenger ship to be attacked in the war. And in the following days, newspapers from all corners of the world published jolting reports of the horrific scenes and harrowing witness accounts in an inquest which was held in Milford Haven. That followed the attack was chaotic and disorganized, hardly surprising, but also because the SS Falaba crew and passengers had been told they barely had 5 minutes to get out of the boat. Survivors, a Greek coaster, G. Aqua, was one of those who was lost in the debacle. The drifter Wenlock rescued 8 survivors, of whom 2 died later. Kobina Sekyi was one of the fortunate survivors. He managed to get into a lifeboat, at which point one of the Europeans shouted at him that he should be out of the boat, as a black man had no right to be alive when whites were drowning. This incident had a profoundly traumatic effect on him. Another survivor was Jabez Masakwa, grandson of a Liberian chief. On his return to the Gold Coast, Sekyi established and cultivated a flourishing legal practice in Cape Coast as the Anibok Chambers. And I'm happy to bring to your attention again that his grandson has set up chambers in Cape Town and in Johannesburg, also called Anibok chambers. Is that right, Mr. Molo? It's correct. Sekyi was born into the Aborigines Rights Protection Society and politically nurtured in the ARPS. The association was critical of colonial rule and was established in 1897. It was originally formed by traditional leaders and the educated elite to protest the Crown Bills of 1896 and the Lands Bill of 1897, which threatened to erode the basis of traditional land tenure. It became the main political organization that led organized and sustained opposition against the colonial governments, laying the foundation for the political evolution and ultimately leading on to colonial freedom 60 years later. JWC, J.P. Brown, Casey Hayford, Saba were co-founders. The initial office bearers were JWC as president, J.P. Brown, T.F.E. Jones as vice president, Digraph Johnson as treasurer, Kwejiri Agri as secretary, J.S. Abraham, T. Adequate, G. Biney, G. Hughes, Hutchinson, G. Ellis, Peterson, Saba, and A.M. Wright as executive members. In 1902, at one of the meetings of indigenous rulers in the Gold Coast Church in Cape Coast, as reported by the Aborigines Rights newspaper, the meeting, and I quote, with a joint prayer in which even, and I quote this, ended in a joint prayer in which even the heathen claim bearers of the kings participated. O Lord of heaven and earth, thou hast given us lands which we inherited from our forefathers, but the government under whom it has pleased thee to place us, after depriving our native rulers of most of their powers and authorities, are now bent on despoiling us of our individual ancestral rights to our land, unquote. The Africanist anti-imperialist bearings of this sentiment expressed here cannot be lost. Their stated object was that, and I quote, they were saying, I'm quoting, it says, we simply want our education to enable us to develop and improve our native ideas, customs, manners, and institutions, unquote. In 1898, the ARPS sent a delegation to Britain, which was successful in getting the British government to rescind on the lands bill project. The tactics of the organization was campaigns in newspapers, and in fact, the key newspapers of that period which carried this campaign forward was the Gold Coast Methodist Times, the Gold Coast Aborigines in the 19th century, and the Gold Coast Nation and Gold Coast Leader during the first 2 decades of the 20th century. These papers were used as political platforms, rallying points to call attention to African demands. The initial success of the organization was such that it, for the first 2-3 decades, grew up very robustly. But it was very much an elite organization, elite formation of these prosperous people They were mainly backed by the merchants class. And so they tended, as time went on, to be a little more removed in terms of mass society. Later in the National Congress of British West Africa, but interestingly, you will find the National Congress of British West Africa included the same people who were in the Aboriginal right protection were also in that. But this time it was larger. It had been conceived by Akinwande Savage and Kingsley Hayford originally. Akinwande Savage was a Nigerian who was working in Ghana for many years. And Kingsley Hayford, who conceived it, created it. It was launched finally in 1920 in Roger Club, on which occasion Sekyi also presented a paper on African incubation. Very powerful. What's also interesting is that Kingsley Hayford's presentation at a meeting of Roger Club had a very interesting reference to the ideas of Marcus Garvey. Because remember, 1920 was the year that Garvey's movement took off. You know, Garvey had come to America, established the movement in 1916, 1917. And it took off very rapidly. But they were talking about coming back to Africa and so on, and establishing a state in Africa. And Kingsley Hayford was saying that no, they need to be consulted about the idea of setting up a state in Africa and so on. So that's also just a side which is interesting. Now, the other people who were of interest in the National Congress of British West Africa were people like Edward Francis Moore, Ebi Kote Papafio, Papa Sawyer, your former Vice Chancellor's father, and Sekyi. These were the main figures behind the 1920 installation of the NCBWA. Sekyi was also involved very much in the cocoa hold-ups project. So remember, in the 20s and 30s, there was what they described as a cocoa hold-up, where cocoa farmers refused to give their produce to houses which were buying cocoa from them because they were unhappy with the drop in prices. The houses, the big houses were working together to create what they call a pool. The price of cocoa, which sometimes dropping it dramatically, which the farmers could not accept, and so on. By 1935, 36, there were quite a number of farmers already. There were about 100,000 cocoa farmers already. That is, for an industry which had emerged only about 40, 50 years before then, it was dramatic rise. You formed a sizable class with influence in the society and so on. So they could organize, and Sekyi was one of the lawyers who helped them to presentations and confront the financial interests which prevailed at that time. Now, the most authoritative scholar on Sekyi's life and work, Kobina, writes that during a political career spanning 40 years, Sekyi pursued a multifaceted legal and literary career and left behind huge corpus running into several volumes, which he, of course, subsequently donated to the National Archives, mainly in Cape Coast. Kwate Papafio, 60 years ago, said this of Sekyi, and I quote, John Squatty, says, Kobina Sekyi was possibly unique in the history of Ghana, and his kind may not be repeated soon. The elements were not only mixed in him, but many. A man of adamantine will and strength of character, a man so uncompromising in his beliefs about what was right and proper, that practically to his last breath, he put the leadership claims of the old Aborigines Right Protection Society before those of any national organization, past or present. A man of such great intellect and crushing wit as to strike fear and create apprehension in his opponents. Kobina Sekyi went through life knocking down other people's idols, right and left, and setting up his own. That's John Squatty. Elsewhere, John Squatty writes again about Sekyi, and it's interesting because Squatty's language is also very colorful himself. He says, clad defiantly in his kente cloth, once outside the law courts, Sekyi looked out with ill-concealed pity and scorn at many kinds of people. He despised those African compatriots who so pathetically showed that they could not live outside some of the more ridiculous habits they had cultivated from the West, like wearing black woolen coats and striped trousers in the middle of the torturing heat of Africa, or affecting English food tastes exclusively or habitually. He laughed at ineptitude, held ignorance in contempt, execrated imitation, and to repeat, despised all Europeanized Africans who could not dispense with Western philosophy and poured out Plato, Justinian, and Blackstone with frequency and often without cause. But the more European philosophy he read, the more African he became. No, there has not been a character in recent Ghanaian history quite like Kobina Sekyi. And without his story, it would be a poorer history. If Britain cannot miss her Bernard Shaw's and Bertrand Russell's, neither could Ghana have afforded to have missed Kobina Sekyi. That's John Squatty. Sekyi despised the manner in which Europeanized African social elements, in particular the coastal towns, had taken to wanton cultural Europeanization and affectation to such an extent that even some Fanti could not string together a sentence without extensive code switching with English, throwing in a verbal mix strings of English words. It was the way of exhibition of arrivalism and sophistication. They anglicized their local names, and you know this very well. And especially it's amongst the coastal people, particularly the historically those who came in touch with the West first was the Fools and Bills, and Moons, Obo, Rocks, and becomes Rocks, and Obo becomes Rocks, and Ezekuntu becomes Branson. And you can go on and on. I noticed also is that, you see, when we were children, and say in the 50s, in the 60s, the habit was going out, you know, especially it's what they call the Christian names. They were going out. But now, you know, when we're about to kick the bucket, we see all around us very exotic European first names, Laurentius, and all sorts of funny names that you see for Africans. You know. Not so much the second names or the third name, but the first ones, you know, they become very extravagant in their exotism, you know, and so on. But I noticed that very well. Posters of politicians, the lady politicians who vying for seats in parliament and so on. So I saw this morning Laurentia. I never heard that sort of name before. This is what is happening to us. It means that our sense of recentering Africans is dying again. It's dying out. Under this, in the 60s, in the Nkrumah era, we were resisting this. Now, Sekyi, in a letter he wrote to W.E.B. Du Bois, requesting him to help him to publish a paper he had written. And I have it in here, but I can't find it. He says to him that my name was Ismidra Sekyi, but my people call me Kobina Sekyi. Then I prefer. William Ismidra Sekyi was given to me when I was baptized. Like that name anymore. I prefer Kobina Sekyi. It was a letter he wrote in 1920 to W.E.B. Du Bois. So he was ever, and I have also a quote from his friend when he died. From Benjamin, the lawyer. You know, so, whose son's wife I see here on sort of back somewhere. He said, second, he says, up short. Anyway, the point is that Kobina Sekyi was an imperialist of the highest order. He stand throughout his life. Now, what is important for us is to take a cue from what he was trying to do, asserting Africanness. He was an organist. Organists is people who believed in the time that he studied philosophy. That was the prevalence. In fact, that was the prevalence British that philosophical position. The societies were like organs, and they're made up of parts, and then they can grow and bloom, decay, and that we should be careful not to be borrowing from decaying circumstances and trying to implant them. This was the argument he made in his paper. It's a very famous paper, in 1925, Deuce Muhammad Ali. Just point is that we must strengthen our Africans. Now, how do we do it in our time? How do we presently borrow from the Asian from instituting this that we cannot move forward without our languages. This is a point also made by Kingsley Hayford and Edward Blyden. Of course, there were contrary voices too, like Alexander Crummell a little earlier on. But definitely, and you see, Kingsley Hayford took a lot from Blyden, Edward Blyden. He was personality. It's not Galley who coined the term. It was Edward Blyden, who coined that term. Blyden is a dedicated follower of Blyden. Sekyi and them learned from Kingsley Hayford. So you see, for example, Kingsley Hayford describing himself as a pagan is repeated by Sekyi also. You see, another point, the important point, the upshot of all of this is that how do we proceed? We proceed with our languages. That is the only way to do it. There is no other way we can safely move forward, recentering our culture. So the language is the repository of everything we know, everything we have created, everything which we acquired over the centuries, the millennia, is captured in our language. Our languages define the people. The language is the foundation of the culture of the people. If we lose our languages, we lose ourselves. Our color doesn't save us. Color is irrelevant. It is the culture which is relevant. So if we want to do honors to Sekyi, we have to start with our languages. And our languages, and if you look around the world, there is no single society you would find which makes progress, serious progress, as a society with somebody else's language. There's not one single country. And Asia proves it. If you look at Asia, since the end of the Second World War, the end of colonialism in Asia, there's no exception. All of the nations, and even countries which became independent after Ghana. If you look at a place like Malaysia, they got the independence in August. So we got our independence 6th of March. You see, they now use their own language. We are unfortunately led by people like us, who had all these years so-called post-independent, and who continue to create universities and have institutions. Unfortunately, like this one, and I mean particularly where we're sitting right now, we call it African Studies. So, well, what does the rest of the university do? It doesn't study anything African. You put Africans in a little corner at the campus, African Studies. So what does the rest of the university study? It doesn't study African society. But this is what is happening. And if we don't wake up to it, they start using our this is the way to honor him. What he stood, not only him, but that one. Because there were lots of them. There are others. That was a caretaker in Wasu. It's much younger. Much younger. But he goes with is the early 50s. So please, I think this thing is lengthy, so I have to spare you the book. Some of you are written more than seats sometimes. It's an anti-verbiage, I think. But I think the upshot is that please let's do something. If you want to do honest, Sekyi, let us take this language thing serious. And let us stop doing African studies. African studies is for Europeans who want to study it, and for Chinese who want to study it. Study in Africa, of course, naturally, they are studying their own society, just like everywhere else. You don't go to China to see the Chinese have an institute of the corner Chinese studies. Especially the young ones should make noise about it. See, we are sleeping more in South Africa. It comes up in another form. Recently in the University of Stellenbosch, which started. Yeah. Themselves, children, so it's open now to everybody. The African kids started protesting. But they don't want to be taught in Afrikaans. Once the Afrikaans business to continue. But the university was started for the Boer nationality in South Africa. Educated in their language. What do the Africans kids? No, they want English. They don't want Afrikaans, but they want English. Change one master for another master. They don't say we want Xhosa. See, this is how lost we are. All over Africa, you see this. All over. Guys, that you use the language of the former master, and you're trapped to become part of the former master's culture. Completely. Please let's do all this to them. Sekyi, I'll stop at this point and open the floor, please, for a few observations, comments, interrogation, questions, whatever you want to call it, or what I'm trying to say, what I'm trying to say. Soon as the site is soon, you have the opportunity to be with that, and that's your leisure. But for now, I'll open.
And I've had endless debate with Francis here about this issue of cultural heritage. It is a bit of a challenge. If whatever reason, and the dispersion is what caused the diversity in language, culture, and all of this. Because in many ways we were adjusting to the different environments that we went to. Anyway, in the world, and our children are doing just not only our children were doing that, our children are intermarrying, and in many ways, from a scientific point of view, they are getting a reverse process. Now, this reverse process on convergence, could it be whether we like it or not? No.
That's a very important observation, but there are certain points I need to clarify. We know what say human beings that we talk about, talking about Homo sapiens sapiens. No, not just Homo sapiens, but sapiens sapiens. Like the culture creating hominid. So it's not just. Now we know that out of the sapiens period, about 60 to 70,000 years ago. Now, in this 60 to 70,000 years, we know also that there have been about 3 important waves of movement out of Africa into the rest of the world. But culture of language Language, in fact, is a defining feature of Homo sapiens. You know, the thing about Homo sapiens is the talkative animal, the animal capable of talking, communicating, and talking. Now, the talking also making speech talk has seen evolution. First, there was just vocalization of sounds, significations of sounds, the communicating relation. Then we move to another stage of writing. Writing becomes another stage in the history of the evolution of language. Writing that we know now existed in societies was in Egypt. We found in a place called Abydos. The Abydos tablets represent the earliest. They come about 250, radiocarbon dating shows us about 200, 300 years before Mesopotamia. Now, but that also developed as a way of tracking things, making things, and for the age. 1, 2, 3, 2. Now that also was developed. So that's 6,000 years ago. And then we come to print, to write, indicating it. Remember that paper was in fact based on Chinese developing things. So although writing is happening, of course appeals first writing tough. Now, all of this enhanced communication between groups, people, and strengthening the cultural basis of the society. For as long as you have only one person's life and acquiring knowledge in your life, you die and the knowledge dies. But as soon as there is a possibility of writing, it becomes possible to accumulate information and knowledge, and societies begin to make progress. Diversity is automatic. It goes as people move from one place to another, spend time. What is important, we know now, is that we must respect diversity. We cannot be at each other's throats for being different, culturally different, or in whatever way different. We must respect, tolerate diversity. In fact, celebrate diversity. We as a human community, all of us, become richer the more we can share diversity. Now, I have noticed, for example, here, but not only here in Ghana, South Africa that I'm seeing, that in the urban areas, in urban Africa, are speaking more of each other's languages. See, some years ago, I went to a place called Nima here. I'm saying this to some of you because you may not know where Nima is. Car fixed the brakes on the car fixed. And so I sat whilst they were doing work in the place. Now, it's a place I've known for donkey's years. I grew up. I was amazed to notice that the chap who was fixing the planes could speak almost every language that was around here. And he was speaking then. And he was speaking P, and he was speaking God. And I said to myself, this is fantastic. Because I grew up here. I speak God very well. One of my schoolmates of childhood was there. He was a man who was a propaganda man for the CPP when we were about 6, 7 years old. He's down there. Now, few of us picked up some Christian thing across like that. But now it's happening. Children can speak all these other languages, and it's because of the everyday of people. And we learn each other's language. So I'm not intimidated by the fact that we are celebrating our diversity and that we can become more and more diverse. The thing is that we must give rights to it. People should have rights. You know, the smallest communities you find in ever is that they feel intimidated by the fact that everybody is coming to their area, which is a very limited area of the country, and not necessarily learning, but in fact, I tell them, look, there are more people protecting the Ghana language now than there ever was. Because there are more people who are not mother tongue, quote unquote, Ghana, speaking the language, so the language can never die because the language keeps expanding. More and more people are speaking it. You know, so don't be intimidated by that. You will see the same thing in Zambia. You will see the same thing in Johannesburg. The people around Johannesburg, Lesotho, varieties of that they call Pedi, but it is not a real difference. And yet, there was a lot of import influx of people from the time, the 1870s, 1880s, 19 coming in to work in the mines. Now, they're Zulu speakers. So Zulu has become one of the main languages in an area which is not actually historically Zulu. You see, so let's not be afraid of, let's rather empower these languages, make sure that it's possible for somebody who speaks Ga and who wants to be able to study Ga up to university level to have that possibility. Yeah. The people who call themselves here, Lewis, Adambe, Mina, Ja in Benin, Fulbe in Benin, Aja in Nigeria, speak mutually intelligible languages. If we develop these up to university level, just like from your corner of Africa, your language is in the Ndebele. Ndebele, Zulu, Siswati, Tumbuka, Chisenga, Chingoni, Tanzania. can work out in one university, one unified Google dictionary. We can do the same thing. It's not difficult. It's not difficult if we want to do it. We are the people who are blocking it. It's our class. It's our class. It's, yeah. Okay.
The chairperson for this occasion, you'll be given limited time and then limited time to us so that everybody have to take seats. Like that, yeah, like that.
Sekyi. I know that session was long before informal started. To say about his attitude to informal and informal's policies, so on and so forth.
Yes, I want to come in. My mother was virtually brought up by Kobina Sekyi. When the father died, she was Van Hill, who inherited the family's property, became the guardian. They were all that every evening in evening dresses. And at that time, so Sekyi came from a very rich family and famous politicians, nationalists, and philanthropists as well. Kobina Sekyi's uncle was a co-founder of grand uncle, co-founder of Infantism School. And Van Hill, Kobina Sekyi's uncle, was also co-founder of Achimota School. That's the background. We're very rich, you know. For Kobina Sekyi to change, something must have happened. And just as our speaker said, it may be the drowning part. And my mother was passed on to Kobina Sekyi. At that time, she was not that young. So she knew Kobina Sekyi very well. In fact, when Kobina Sekyi's wife died, my mother had just had a son. So she breastfed Chief, who became a lawyer. So that is the background of Kobina Sekyi. He had tasted the rich way of living, and then there was an exhibition at the National Archives, Dr. Baku thesis, and he showed pictures of when Kobina Sekyi was taken abroad to study. He was accompanied by 2 or 3 aunties and uncles. And at that time, my husband asked me, how did, you know, it was stamped Holborn. I've forgotten that year. But Kobina Sekyi changed dramatically when he inherited the family's wealth. The family, the Peterson family, sent scholarships to Infantism every year. And incidentally, my sister's husband, father, was a recipient. she had seen how rich people lived. Infanticum was founded because the elite of the time realized that the whites were not educating us to a certain level. They were just educating us to take stock of the things they were stealing from our country. So they founded the first secondary school in Ghana, at that time, Gold Coast. Kobina Sekyi studied there. And you will find where Kobina Sekyi and Bahi lived in a house, a 3-story house, very near the castle. If you're interested, you can take a trip there. Told me many things about her uncle Kobina Sekyi. And to make you laugh a bit, he said OB. When you get OB, meant Obrabon in So my mother became very traditionalist. She poured libation. She became Asafohin, you know, a warrior, a traditional warrior when we have a Cripples festival. And her 4 girls all went through the puberty rites, Akan puberty rites. So she was converted to a form when they wore evening dresses to dinners, ate in silver plates, and she said there was something that the servants or slaves used to pull for them to get fresh air. And many things she told me about Kobina Sekyi. I'm sorry I didn't record her. So that's the background. Kobina Sekyi did not come from a poor background at all, from a very rich background. In fact, the school in Infanticum is on part of my family lands. The whole of Apung belonged to the Petersons. My grandmother, grandchildren of the founder, the co-founder of Infanticum School. That is why I get attached to Kobina Sekyi. And my mother took care to teach us our language. I didn't grow up in the central region where Fanti is spoken, but she took time to teach me very well, to such an extent that in Achimota school, they offered just one prize for Fanti. And although I never lived in any Fanti area, I always won the Fanti prize for the whole school. So she had such a big influence on her. And she used to wear, Kobina Sekyi used to wear cloth and wig and gown to courts. Yes. He was a playwright as well. And you did mention he wrote this book, The Blinkers, which has been acted, you know, many with blinkers. And if you are more interested in Kobina Sekyi, Dr. Baku thesis will tell you many things about him. My mother told me that Kwame Nkrumah used to come and visit Kobina Sekyi long before Kobina Sekyi died in 1956. But whatever they discussed, I mean, she didn't know. But Kwame Nkrumah used to come regularly.
See our political history in terms of the contradictions in terms of the contrary positions of people over time. If you look at our history a bit closely, also in looking at and the social basis of the continuities, the social Right Protection Society, 1898. Then it runs right through to 1920 when you have the National Congress of British West Africa, which suddenly enlarged the canvas a bit, made it a West African thing, nationalism. And then that run for a period, Aboriginal rights continued because the same people were in both organizations. We get to the beginning of the UGCC. The UGCC is an organization which brought in Nkrumah. So the changes in the society itself, which they could not accommodate, they could. So the people said, look, if they can't change it, then let's break away. It's a different historical period. You have different social classes emerging, lots of young people coming to the urban areas, new classes, and then you have that. Now, Kobina Sekyi and Nkrumah learned a lot from Kobina Sekyi. But Nkrumah also on the block. Nkrumah, in the end, Kobina Sekyi's position could not contain the transformations which had come into the society. Because remember, his life spanned the whole of the Aboriginal. He was the last president of the Aboriginal Right Protection Society, which was formed when he was 6 years old. You see. And he grew up in that organization. So these things, one must be a bit flexible. One must not always see people as being antagonistic or contradictory, but sometimes also extensions, distinct extension, distinction, variation, differentiation on a theme. The conditions change, new voices emerge. They emerge as contradicting each other, but they also should be seen as representative of continuity, which is coming out of society.
Answered by a chairperson, but I'll repeat it. You talked about Kobina Sekyi as a philosopher, lawyer, a politician. As has been said, he was also a literary person. Things, the Blinkards, Mrs. Professor, just to what extent, what are the contradictions in Kobina Sekyi's personal life vis-a-vis his literary works? Many people seem to think that his private life, lived life, as in his writings and things, trade African personality called. And Madam Chair, after the lecture, I would like to make a presentation to make this. So please don't close until I've made the presentation.
I'm sorry to bother you with my mother again. She told me that there was a library in the house, and every day you have to go to the library for 1 hour, where Kobina Sekyi lived. So when I was reading law in this very university, and I wasn't reading or handling books. She used to get so surprised. What type of university is this? What are you studying, law? And I don't see you with books, you know, because she was made to understand that when you go to a university, or you should be going to libraries and reading books. So the whole house, I think, were very academic or literary. No wonder Ambassador Banise became very academic, literate, you know. That was the atmosphere in the house.
Point I think is interesting too, but what I saw, what was interesting for me with regards to his writing, which is not overtly political, like the Blink cards, was that again you could see that he had taken a lot from Casely Hayford. In Casely Hayford's book from 1911, Ethiopia Unbound, there is this character called Kwamankra who articulates what he's thinking all the time, what Mr. Hayford himself wants to say, actually. Uses the same format on wider canvas, you see. Figures like Abrofonsem, you know, in other words, creating a concept and embodying the concept as a person, an idea, using an idea and turning it's like an allegorical style, you know. It's using the same formats that Casely Hayford developed, but on a wider canvas now, using it for drama and 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 people, you know, playing that part instead of just one man articulating that position. That I found to be extremely, extremely interesting. Now, some of his poems are also special because I remember writing an article in Tina Bantu, you know, and Cape Town. This time I saw them quoting one of Community's poems in there. And then it was quoted back by Mbeki, Tabu Mbeki, you know, it's Africanism. And Mbeki was projecting the same type of, wanting to project the same type of African. Sekyi's poem, stanzas from Sekyi. So, well, this is something remarkable, noticeable.
Thank you. My name is Noble. My name is Noble, a PhD student in history of science. I just wanted to comment a little bit on your remarks about the position of the Institute of African Studies within the geography of the University of Ghana. The Institute of African Studies, because of the nature of my research, I've had to come back to read Kwame Nkrumah's African Genius, which was a speech he gave when the institute was founded. And I think that his original idea about the institute was that research from this place would fertilize the entire university, you know, so that far from it being just one building tucked away in the corner of the university, it is actually the heartbeat of the university, such that all of the other departments are like arteries that pass through this place to be oxygenated with African perspectives, so that they go back into the university, so that for me, it was really to fill a very important place in the history of this university. And so some of the projects that Nkrumah had thought about was the African classics, which for me was a laudable project, or which would be the foundation upon which all the various disciplines like philosophy, law, and science would feed back on the African classics. So I think Kobina would even oppose the idea of the African classics. And then lastly, the institution that for me is the pivot of my research is the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences. And the idea was that they will collaborate with this institute on the Encyclopedia Africana, which would be also a knowledge base for African students who are studying various of the sciences. So I think it's just a little bit of a pushback on your remarks about the place of the history of African studies within the university. And when I was studying here, I was in chemistry. Professor Diamond was my professor, and it was a university requirement to come here and take a course in African studies. And this should be able to enlighten us to look at African perspectives through whatever lens that we were studying, whether in physics or chemistry or mathematics. So just a little bit of my comments there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, you see, what I'm trying to say, I'm not against using a certain section of the university as a base in coordinating ideas and focusing ideas on issues which are of wide. This sort of way of looking at studies anywhere else in the world which is making progress. You don't find in China students go to a special institute for Chinese studies. Everything they study concerns their society in the first instance. This idea of African studies was created mainly for Western scholars coming into Africa. And that's the original idea. Coming into Africa, maybe teaching for part of the time, but for most of the time, doing their own research about whatever is of interest to them about Africa. This is how it started. And we have inherited this without question. That's the issue. It's not Nkrumah's idea that we must have a place which is a hub or which, well, that's fair enough. That's also right. The other thing, and maybe this is a little more sensitive, look at Nkrumah's work. Nkrumah's first book was Towards Colonial Freedom, 1946, 47, he wrote that. You see? His book, in 1956, Ghana, the autobiography, in which he writes that I'm a non-denominational Christian and a Marxian socialist. And I don't see any contradiction between the two. That was 1956. Now, he died in 72. 72. His last book, which was published posthumously, has philosophical groundings and positions which were not different from Mao Zedong or Ho Chi Minh. See what I mean? Now, that's the best thing about Nkrumah, was that he was making progress and uninhibitedly. He was refining his ideas. If he took a position which improving his ideas, making them more societally relevant, cutting edge. So please be flexible when you're thinking about this. Nkrumah did not write Bibles. What he said in the beginning was not what he was saying in the end. He was one of the few leaders we've had who was dynamic. who was changing, and he was learning, and he was never stopped learning. Nkrumah never stopped learning. Nkrumah, and you see it in his work, you look at conscientism, which is a big point, because I think it was influenced very much by the work of Abraham, William Abraham. You see, what he was doing was that he was using the British philosophical tradition of symbolism, logical symbolism, to express some ideas, but some of the ideas were also contradictory. Ideas which, if you look at his last book, stand at variance with what he had written at a particular time. Nkrumah was phenomenal because he was a man who was developing, or intellectually developing. Nkrumah did not learn everything in the beginning and end up with whatever we knew in the beginning in the same exact way. So be generous to
I think that one of the important lessons that has come out of your presentation is the importance of language, the critical issue of language that has come to be corrected, because Africa is the only continent of this planet that communicates in English, Portuguese, Spanish, and French as their national language, as we are doing now. So, Arabic has come to be called Arabic. Okay. Now, you see, Sekyi, the image of Sekyi in court instead of the colonial Greek, brings to mind, the issue of ancestors were smarter than us, in the sense that when they came in contact with the colonizer, they described them, they called them by the correct names. For example, now we hear the expression Miboni. You hear it in music, you hear it in the expression liberally. And when we delve into it, why I'm saying that our ancestors were smarter than us, when they encountered them and their interaction with them, trade or whatever, they describe them as in a can, Nipa, Abu, Nipa, Insan. The correct description of the colonizer was a man of deception, because he will deal with you and then grab you plus your goods and take you away. Now, if you go across around the west line, the west coast of Africa, you'll find that there's especially the way our people describe, they use the similar expression in their language to describe the colonizer. Inca is Abo for me. Abo is Ayevo, if I'm wrong. Say a fox, a trickster. And in Yoruba is Oyibo. We have a situation where this description of this character. Now, people are actually like, oh, I mean, this is, come on.
When Elmina, when we say Broyikwesi, because the English arrived here on a Sunday, and Broyiko means a Dutchman. because they are right here on a Thursday. And my for Boko, so and they wanted the Lina people to support the Dutch. The Fantis decided that both of them were evil, so they wouldn't support any. Well, whoever wins, they will have to take him like that or them like that. So I think the African has been aware of the evil one. And the bond of 1844 had to be done. Otherwise, the chiefs, the Ga and the Fanti chiefs realized that the white man was so evil that he had developed a gun, something that can kill so many people. And they had the guns. So the only way out was to come to some agreement. We say that if somebody gives you time, somebody owes you and gives you time, it will come to pass. So the bond of 1844 was based on that. When they wanted to take our lands, and we said that we were not the owners, and our ancestors were the owners, and we were caretakers. Otherwise, maybe, I don't know, I'm not a historian, we could have been treated like America, where they fought them and they conquered and they took their lands. And anywhere they went, and the temperature was suited them, they made sure they wanted a permanent, like East Africa, South Africa. That is why I think they had a tough time being independent. But West Africa were helped by mosquitoes as well. So I think we've always recognized the role the white man played. Yeah. I think so. That's my contribution.
Well, thank it's and the all. I'm not sure whether our sisters as they were the different historical stage. I'm not going to teach you as a panel which has all the answers. That's what the reason why I got this micro was about the language. Yeah, the importance on knowing that all but circumstances granted. The thing is that we should, when we're talking about Africa, Asia, or Latin America, we forget that colonies, interrupted their development. So we can't treat them like something when the most stupid I think I have, because the thing is that what have we done a little classroom in Ghana? The contents of education, I'm sorry, some of the contents of education in our country are totally wrong, and we have been having panels on criticizing that, on pointing fingers, and even judging. What have we done to change the contents of it? My professor was talking about underdeveloped Africa. I mean, see, it's all, and I wrote a template and pointed out how can it thrive when only one third of the population understand the language of the economy. It won't fly, and then it won't happen. Yeah. Let's do something about that. And I mean, I'm following on myself, I'm following on everybody, not only the finance. What you just said about the elephant in the room in planning was very ambitious. Yeah. And I was also thinking, how did he get on the organization? Yeah, but you already said that. Said that why do they create a small space just to teach African studies? But in China, we don't have that in other places also. But then I'll say, maybe look at a broader picture. What is going on in their education system? What kind of knowledge is being produced or disseminated that they don't know, that they don't need a special place to teach Chinese Chinese scholars. We are teaching African studies. The content of our education is problematic. The average Ghanaian doesn't know that. Okay, so
Thank you very much. Question has to do with the languages that have been spoken about. Recently, I went for a conference at the Kofi Annan Institute for Peace, Keeping and Training, and he believed that leaders should rather spearhead development, whereas we all are the government. So my question would be that how can we teach the ordinary citizen that development is not based at the top, and then we all should contribute in developing action? And how can we also task our leaders take part in development or decision making that would benefit our because Bob said that the people such as Mr. Kobina Sekyi, they were independent. They were not dependent on things from people. Their motive was to promote change. So there was the love and the passion to develop their country or their people. But then in our case, people are saying that wait till I get power before I develop or do A, B, C. Citing the recent Galamsey issue or political situation at the moment, they are saying, vote for me. When I get power, I'll do A, B, C. And I'm asking that, what is stopping you from making the change you need to do now? Waiting for power to be given to you, or for you to get into power to amass a particular amount of wealth before you help your people to become who they want to be. Is that not being selfish on their part? But then you see Kobina being one person who loves people and trying to promote change in his particular nation or development for the world at large or Africans at large. And we push our leaders to do what is going to benefit our people. That's my first question. About language, do you think that we should make English and other local languages a national language, like, for example, English, Chi, Ga, and Hausa to be a national language? Or should we take the English away and then push our local languages to be a national language?
Thank you very much for your questions. I think they're very sharp, it's very pertinent. I'll start at the back. We push English out and develop our own. stops us from learning somebody else's language. Don't do that at the expense of your own. It's in the world. I saw this myself, many years ago, when I ended up in a place like the Netherlands. I was going to the first year, children speaking Dutch, of course. That's the language of the people there. So you have to force yourself to. List of books they gave you at the end to read would be, for example, 25. And they would say to you, choose any 5. Now, some of the books you will find are in French, some in Dutch, some in German, some in English. And you ask yourself, well, what does this mean? What sort of educational infrastructure has produced a situation where the kids in the university can do all this? That's the first one. Because they think that at the early stages of your education, you get sufficient exposure to these languages, to learn them as second language, third language, fourth language you know, not as a replacement for your mother tongue. So on the side. And so by the time they get to university, they can have of all these languages. You see, they don't speak the languages, they don't compete with native speakers of the language in their language. You follow me? They don't want to compete with Shakespeare or Charles Dickens. That is not the idea. To read a book in English, it's all right, whatever you want, anything of your own language. This is how it's done everywhere. That is why if you go to Italy, you'll find the Italians use Italian. When you go to Germany, the Germans use German. They don't say English is an international language. And because of that, all of us have to use English. No. So that's now with regards to your point about development. You see, it depends on what you understand to be development. See, development is not something you go and buy in a shop. Development uplifts this whole society, but that development cannot happen if, as you say, 3/4 of the people understand that the development is somebody else's language. If the development is in English, and you are speaking Fanti, then you come out of it. Spoken Fanti have that capacity which English has, French has. Empower your language to have all the words that are reflected for simplification purposes in English or French. With borrowed words which they have others. But you see, the Japanese changed I don't know what they call the revolution. Sent the kids out to universities and institutions all around the world to come back. But for a PhD study, you must translate a work in a foreign language into Japanese. So that they built the capacity in Japanese to relate to every new development, every modern development that there is, and they bring it back in Japanese. They don't hold it in English. They don't become part of the Englishman's culture. They feed it into their culture. Language is the center of culture. Development cannot happen outside the frame of language. Every society which is developed also in the language. So that's good. Now, the third point, the quick one there, is that we can't solve this problem and at the same time accept the position of Africa. You can't say that colonialism is dead with colonialism. Same percentage almost as there are countries here. Okay, well, the language we call it, we have to explain because are related to languages which are spoken in 5 countries. The Gurimachi languages, what they call the most in the languages. And you see, utilize. In the north of this country, precisely this is a Groshu, there are languages just like action, that to solve this problem, the same thing is true in South Africa, for example. I told you that Mr. Warrior's language is talking about Zimbabwe, Malawi, Zambia, Botswana, Swaziland, South Africa. You see? Then the other language, the other big language is spoken in Namibia, in Botswana, same language. In Botswana, they say a nation, the Botswana nation. 80% of them speak Tswana. But in fact, the majority of Tswanas are not in Botswana. They're the so-called immigrants. They are in South Africa. You see how ridiculous it is. And why is this so? Because the colonialists divided us up, not for our purposes. Ghana there's nothing holy historically about Ghana. Or Nigeria was the creation of Lugart's wife. There's nothing holy about it. We have to solve that problem. relate to all the English-speaking peoples along the coast. All the Gwili people should be able to relate to each other historically, because even the clan systems you'll find in Africa, the clan systems cross borders. You'll find the same clan using the same totem all the way from Tanzania to South Africa. His group, for example, the same Glovo clan. It's the elephant. Use the elephant as their symbol and so on. You'll find them all over the place. Lesotho, you find them in Botswana. You see, in Zambia, you find them as these are clans, these are clan systems. How simple. That is our history. That is our identity in historical time. That goes back thousands of years. That relationship of belonging to a certain clan system. Clans which you will find amongst the Akani in Cote d'Ivoire and Akandhe, which they share. These clans existed before the border was divided, border was created in 1884. Africans have existed from Adam. So there you are. Please think about it. You're a young person of a dying man.
One more question. Professor, I don't believe I will end. You said you end it. We've taken a lot in, and we have a lot to think about and discuss. So please let's see.
Thank you so much, Prof, for that insightful chat about Kobina Sekyi's ideals during the time he was alive. Have to celebrate diversity, which is very, very important. As to language, which is a very important aspect of culture. And I speak Kasim and Nankani. And I remember very well when I was a child, sitting around my parents or elders when they speak, use riddles, and even stories. I learned a lot from that. Just listen to those things. You learn a lot about life. Now, when it comes to African studies, comparing it with other countries, I am thinking, now, many African countries were colonized. And because it took a very long time, their culture was sort of adulterated. And by the time we gained independence, Nkrumah saw the need to establish the Institute of African Studies to help Africans and non-Africans to learn about the history, the language, and development of Africans. So, is there, when we take colonization, the differential treatment, Africans and maybe Asians, could that have been the reason why Africans, for example, Africans will need to learn a lot about their own culture because they lost a lot of things. all these things are embedded in the in the language or their languages. This is one aspect. The other part is that culture is dynamic. And as it's dynamic, we learn, we throw away those that are archaic and no longer serving our interests, and also borrow new ones. Now, with regards to the foreign languages, which are currently we are using, they are official languages, but they are not national languages because we have not institutionalized them by acts of parliament to serve as national language. Of course, maybe Swahili and others may be national languages. So, wouldn't that be the reason why it is important that we Africans, we have to make a lot about our culture? Now, you have also explained that part of the problem is being perpetuated by the elites because we have developed a lot of taste for foreign goods. Foreign want to live like foreigners. Even if we have wives, they have to give birth. We want them to go outside and go and give birth so that they will be nationals of those countries. So there are a lot of things that are working against us that now we don't have the luxury to set up African studies and just allow foreigners to come and learn about our culture. But we also have to make a lot of efforts to learn about our culture. Thank you so much.
You use have histories, they change all the time. Slowly, takes a long time, but they change. Languages hold the memory, like it was said here, for example, that when people say, oh, Bruni, what does it mean? You see, and you won't understand it unless you understand the relationship that's obtained at a certain point in history. Defines it. When we say Cabossier, I was pointing out that one relates to a Portuguese period. And so language is memory. It's also the memory of the people. Reflects the memory of the people. It's true that its culture is dynamic, yes. Language is dynamic. Language is culture. Culture is dynamic. It's changing all the time. It doesn't stand still. The idea that sometimes you hear people say, he speaks Southern Africa, for example. Sometimes people say to you, oh, he's speaking deep Zulu, deep Zulu. What they mean is that you're speaking like they speak in the villages. You see. But language changes. It should be possible. In the language, the structure of the languages, and languages can be manufactured. Some societies have manufactured languages just to be able to give a basis for development and holding the society together and giving identity to the people. I always give three examples of this. One is Bahasa, Indonesia, which arose as a pidgin in the archipelago of 5,000 islands. Another example is modern Hebrew, what they use in Israel. It's not more than 150 years ago. They created it. The first tertiary education in a place like Israel was in 1913. Study up to university in the language they have to be developed. So language can be developed. something resuscitated. Look at it's only in 1917, 1 year after they rose up in rebellion against the British, that they were able to start. And in fact, their leader used to go to everybody who wants the resuscitation of the Irish language should wear that badge. It started during the 1917. Now, you can study in their language. We're talking about bringing them in to help you when you were minister. The language is wiped out, literally. I have a friend there called Joggins, who's in the activist group there. They're resuscitating the language. So languages can be built up again. The languages that are dying can be made to come alive again. People are serious about it. Africans are not yet serious. We are not serious about our languages yet. That is our problem. Not at all serious. That is why. But if we want to, I'm sure in 10 years we could do that. South Africa. The Afrikaners defined themselves as Afrikaners only in 1870. Before then, they were seen just as an extension of the Dutch, but they started calling themselves, we are saying we are distinct from the Dutch. See, 1913, they started writing, they had the rules of spelling, the orthography, developed soon after the Act of Union. In fact, they agreed only to the terms of a treaty in the war against the British if their language would be recognized. Then, who was the president in Transvaal, he refused. He said he's not going to sign the treaty with the British until they had agreed to allow their language to develop. These are people who understand the importance of language. To understand the importance of language. And they wrote of writing their language the first time they wrote the language with rules of spelling. Only in 1913. The same year, they took it to schools. Once they had done it, they immediately implemented it. 5 years later, 1918, it was in university. They took it to Parliament. See, these are people who are now determined. They know what they want, and they're serious about it. 1925, it was in Parliament. 1933, they produced their first Bible in their language, written with the rules they developed in language. After they had written the language with the rules the first time, every 20 years, they could study anything in the world in the language. Now look at us. Look at us. Self-independence. People can write our languages. And we compete, people like me and you, compete with Shakespeare in their languages. And we think we are doing something good. So that is the issue. That is the issue. Your language is in 5 countries. So let's get to work. Let's push our people. I'll tell you a story in the last. in this country have been playing with this language thing. And so they accept it, and they don't want to change it. They want to change it, they don't want to change it. They want to change it. Serious. We're not serious yet. And we are to develop. The end develops in Africa. Using their languages. Full stop. Thank you.
Chair, don't take much of your time. Let's give you 3 to 4 minutes. We're going to extend the subject matter of today's lecture. Just want to make a small presentation to my secondary school classmates. It's a pride. We're in the same dormitory, the same house, the same classroom, until he decided to go and do his sixth format in Franceville and left us behind the country. He is giving me a lot of the books that he's written. Johannes 10. This was a panty man who went and studied in to attempt to write the Bible in fact. He started the school, or head of the school in Kobina. I'm a chemist, similar to you, not literary, but I've written a few things outside chemistry also. And I have 2 of them which I want to present to you. The first one is Hillel Liman, the biography, scholar, diplomat, statesman. Secretary of the party that I've autographed it. The second book is my own titled My Life, an historical narrative. And this is volume 1. This is the first 40 years to me. To finish volume 2, he says he's a dying man. But before I give this one to him, I would like to read just about 5 or 6 lines. So, I remember one of the most exciting symposia we had in 1961 was on the Congo crisis after the murder of this woman. We touched the Congo melting pot, the title suggested by my brother, who was then in Upper Six at St. Augustine. Amazing that some of the panelists and the audience made predictions even at that time. Predictions similar to what my classmate, Sekyi, had made in 1960 when the troubles started in Congo. But the Congo crisis would last for decades, and that murder and pillage, fueled by the West, would continue for a long time. We had then just finished our O-level exams We were in the dining hall. I'm sure you recall this incident. Hearing about Lumumba's death. There is a story about a fancy woman. Two people, one man and one woman, sitting by each other. And the woman was referring to the man, Prof, 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 Prof. The person sitting by them asked, what kind of prof are you? In what subject? And the man said, actually, I'm not a professor. I am a prophet. You see, he's not only a professor, but he's also a prophet.
Shall speak in English. I would like to first thank Professor Kra for giving us a stimulating and controversial set of remarks. I spoke with him, I think it was yesterday or the day before, and he wanted to have a spirited, Q&A session. And he was skeptical about how that could be instigated. And he said to me, been controversial all my life. Leave it to me, was what he said. And of course, that's come to pass. Our gathering has been a gathering of few people, but mighty intellects. Fantastic questions, thought-provoking questions. We'll have to chew on the nuggets of controversy that we have listened to today. I'm very thankful to you for agreeing to deliver these remarks. It may be the last time that we'll have a chance to engage in spirited debate, but I doubt that will come to pass. So let us go into the quiet of the evening reflecting on this. And I thank you very much for taking the trouble to come out at this time to listen to the Prof. As you can see from what happened today, listening to him every time is an occasion to remember. I would also like to thank the chairperson who has the 11th.5 hour agreed to be chair. And she asked me for instructions, which I wrote in my illegible handwriting. And I thought she would just repeat them. Her embellishments were extemporaneous and to the subject. So thank you very much for saving us. I'd like to end by introducing the other members of the committee which made this event possible. Let me start on the far side with Sekyi, followed by Mr. Sekyi, I am a member, and finally we have the creator, or these days they call the founders, the founder of the series, Professor Kra. Thank you very much. On that note, we are adjourned until the next Kobina lecture.
Okay. But this was something given to me about a minute or because through my mother, I came to love of message. So I'm very bonded with the children and the family on that side. My maiden name is Fanny Manson. Call me Auntie Fanny. And my official name is rather long. The name. So my official name is Mrs. Salma, which is the Muslim name. Francis, of Francis, and then I use my